and a very warm welcome to all our attendees. Very pleased to have you all with us for day 2 of Onward and Outward, the future of emigration from India. My name is Rohini, and this is a webinar series by India Migration Now, where we intend to explore the big questions around the future of emigration. So today's session is focused on a number of things. Our panelists will be discussing everything from the strategy for immigration policy to the role of skilling, untapped potential, new corridors, and also crucially what needs to change in our policy ecosystem to ensure safe and legal migration for our people. So with that, we have many excellent speakers with us today, so I will not take up more time with this introduction. I would just like to quickly introduce our moderator for today, Dr. A. Didar Singh. Dr. Singh has been closely associated with India's migration ecosystem for many years, having served as the secretary in the erstwhile Ministry of Overseas Indian Affairs. He's also a former Secretary General of the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce, and he is an advisor to Hyman as well. Dr. Singh, thank you very much for joining us, and over to you to start the proceedings.
Thank you very much. Thank you. This is really an important initiative that Indian Migration Now has done, and I really must compliment every one of you who has got this together. In fact, I listened in on your day 1, which Amit was moderating. That really went well, and we got a lot of new ideas which we didn't know about or hear about till before that. So I'm glad that you have shared them with the Protector General of Immigrants, Ambassador Sangwan. And he will be responding to it today. So before we get into too many details, I want to really first introduce for the rest of the people here Ambassador Sangwan, who, as we all know, not only worked earlier in the Ministry of Overseas Indian Affairs, but is now the Protector General of Immigrants. Incidentally, for people who don't know this, the Protector General of Immigrants is the oldest surviving office in Government of India to this date. Did you know that? It's the oldest office that has remained the same since it was set up in 1824 or whatever it was, and has remained the same in Government of India. So it's a remarkable office, and we're really happy that Ambassador Sangwan has taken that over. As we all know, he's from the Ministry of External Affairs. He was earlier the Deputy Chief of Mission at Tehran in Iran, and he was Ambassador to Armenia. So after being Ambassador, we are very happy to have him come here and join the External Affairs Ministry and really take over this particular role of Protector General of Immigrants, which is a key role. I have some key questions for him, which of course he will address in a presentation that he's going to share with us. But basically, sir, there are a few things that I want you to actually really look at directly. And these include, I would say, besides the fact of a review that was talked about in the first session, that means a review of all the protocols and all the insurance schemes and everything else which needs to be looked at during this period. But more than that, what I need to really ask you is, can we really look at the post-COVID migration issues and see that India will continue to be number 1 in the world in being able to be the main provider of skills, the main provider of human resource, the main provider of migrants that go and become fantastic diaspora around the world? Can we really make sure that this situation will prevail in the future? With these few words, I would like Ambassador Sangwan to now make his presentation and address some of the issues that have been sent to him by Rohini in advance. Thank you very much, Ambassador Sangwan. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, sir. I'm very happy to share my views here. I joined as Protector General of Immigrants on 24th June 2020, so not very old here. The office is very old, as sir has said. So you all know about the functions of the Protector General of Immigrants. Now, COVID brought in new challenges to the office because we deal with overseas employment, but the major part is immigration clearances to largely unskilled and semi-skilled immigrants who go to the Gulf countries. Now, we propose to have a new immigration bill introduced in the parliament shortly, which will facilitate immigration, which will make it more transparent. That is the endeavor, at least. And so that, as Dr. Singh has said, so that we promote migration rather than being an obstacle to migration. Our idea is to promote migration, So the most important change that will be brought about in the Immigration Act will be that instead of clearances, which are online anyway now, even the recruiting agents, when they apply for a registration with the Protector General of Immigrants, everything is online. So now they will just do a registration, simple registration of a few minutes rather than taking clearances. So that is a big change, apart from other administrative changes. So I'll just run through this PowerPoint presentation which we have, which has some of the features of the new bill. And then I would also talk about some of the changes that we have brought about because of COVID-19 in terms of facilitating the recruiting agents, because the registered recruiting agents are our backbone. Because as you would know, a lot of people go through illegal channels, but we have to help the recruiting agents who are registered with us and who take the immigrants and provide jobs to them, primarily in the Gulf countries. So some of the shortcomings of the Immigration Act 1983 were that we don't have enough data about the immigrants who go abroad. For example, the e-migrate system that we have captures only the immigration clearance required immigrants, which is about, for example, 350,000 people last year. But as you all know, a lot of much more than this go through other channels, for example, on visitors visa to the Gulf, and then they convert it into employment. So our endeavor is to bring these agents also within the system. To how can we do that? That we'll discuss also. Right now, as I mentioned, the regime is more regulatory in nature. Can we go to the previous slide, please? Yeah, it's regulatory in nature rather than a facilitator. So we intend to remove clearances and just bring in a very simple registration process. The pre-departure orientation training for immigrants is already there. It is proposed to be brought in. Skill accreditation will be done. We have labor cooperation agreements with the Gulf countries, and we will streamline them. There will be welfare measures for people going abroad. At state level, we will establish committees headed by, which will include the Home Secretary, the Labor Secretary, and the Secretary dealing with NRI affairs. And punishments will be made more stringent for illegal agents. Next slide, please. This I have already mentioned, that immigration would be managed rather than controlled by a simple registration process. What we intend to do is that all people, the ECR and the ECR regime would go. So all people who go abroad for employment through the human resource agents, as we would call them rather than recruiting agents, would need to be registered. This will be a simple registration process. For other people who do not go through the HRAs, that is, for example, a person is going to US to work in the Silicon Valley, there will be voluntary registration. This is to capture data for policy making. And this voluntary app would be, say, on the mobile phone, and a person can fill in his basic data about, if he wants to, that is, in a very simple manner, so that we have a database for policy formulation. We intend to introduce some innovative features in this app. For example, we would have the various tourism sites of the place where the person is going. We would have sort of an emergency button, so that if the person falls in some difficulties, he can immediately, contact the concerned Indian mission. Then features like, if he wants to translate some signage of some country in some other language, it will be converted to English. Similarly, translation of the local language of that country into English and things like that. This will incentivize them to register in a few minutes. This I am talking of the people who are not going to the HRAs, because the people who are going to the human resource agents are vulnerable ones. Those are the ones who have to compulsorily register, but not clearance. Huh? Now, the human resource, last one, please. I'm not yet finished. Human resource agencies would need to register with lesser bank guarantees and space requirements. This we have already done. Even in the present regime, we have reduced all the bank guarantees on various categories like 8 lakh, 16 lakh, and up to 50 lakh, which the recruiting agent has to deposit with the PG's office, to half. And the space requirements, which is presently 50 square meters, has been done etiquette. Now, etiquette means even if it is a very minimal thing, our endeavor is we don't want people to spend a lot, or recruiting agents to spend a lot on space requirements, especially in times of COVID when they are facing huge financial crunches. And this would also induce illegal agencies, because sometimes they think, oh, I'll have to spend a lot of money on having an office and things like that. Then we will make provision for human resource agents to register as companies or limited liability partnerships. This will bring them in the organized sector. They will be able to take loans and hire HR talent, etc. The OIA 1 division and the PG division will be called the Bureau of Immigration Policy and Bureau of Immigration Administration. There will be immigrants welfare committees and missions. In some form it is already there, but it will be formalized. I've already talked about nodal committees in the states and punishments more stringent. Next slide, please. This I have already talked about. Next slide. Yeah, so there will be a simple electronic method of registration via an app. This is for the people who don't go through HRAs. The ones who go through HRAs will have to register on the eMigrate system. I've already mentioned about the incentives which we'll give for registering for people who are not going through HRAs, because we want to have their data for policy making. We will publicize this information widely through print and audio media, through media banners, posters, etc., and print and audio media. Next one. The human resource agents would be registered with a nominal bank guarantee and without any minimum space requirements. Already we have reduced it. We have seen that the bank guarantee has been revoked for recruiting agents only 14 times in the last 10 years. So we don't intend to keep. We can even think of a part or a large portion of the bank guarantee in terms of some insurance schemes. That is also on the cards. Currently, 878 recruiting agents are registered as proprietorship, and already we have 242 as companies and 272 under the partnership. We will also, I was told that pre-2009, there are some recruiting agents who are registered as a proprietorship, and they would continue to want to register as proprietorship only. So we will keep a provision in the bill to let them do so for some time, because they may not be, because we don't want to disturb them very much. Next one. Rating of HRAs is like, you know, any organization has awards for people who excel. We have the Padma Awards in India for outstanding achievement. Every field has. So there will be a criteria on which the recruiting agents or the human resource agents would be rated, and then awards would be given to them. This could be the number of workers sent abroad, the number of grievances against HRAs. We will devise a system. This is an idea. We will keep discussing this with various stakeholders. Average time for closure of grievances. You can have a look on the board. Next one. Labor and welfare wing in Indian missions. Already it is there. It will be more streamlined. We have defined certain people who will be there in this committee. This will include the head of mission. It will include the NRI associations of that host country. It will include some representatives from the local ministries of the host country. It will provide counseling and legal services, facilitation of medical services. Pravasi Bharatiya Sahayata Kendras already exist in Dubai, Jeddah, Riyadh, and Kuala Lumpur, and they will continue to do so. These are 24/7 helplines for immigrants. Next one.
Mr. Sangwan, may I request you to just move a little quicker if possible.
Yeah, it's already almost finished. Next one. Yeah, this I have already explained. Next one. Registration also I have explained. The immigration bill, what will be the features. Next one. Welfare and protection also I have explained to you. Next, please. This is just a comparison of. Next one, please. I think, yeah, that was it. So I've also, now, for example, space requirements, and also one more point which we have, which I didn't cover in the presentation, was that one benefit that we have given presently to the recruiting agents because of COVID is that all recruiting agents who apply for fresh registrations or for renewal of their licenses up to 31st March 2021, no fee will be charged for them, and there will be an automatic approval. So now I think I have covered most of the questions which Rohini had sent me, but if there are, I can answer them.
I think we will be having a more structured Q&A session towards the end. So I think now if we go on to the other speakers, and we can put all our questions together and address them together at the end.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ambassador Sangwan. You really have covered very well the immigration bill. And may I also suggest that this presentation that you've shared with India Migration Now, that they share this presentation with the other participants. And in case anybody has any specific issues or suggestions, they can then send them in and we will share them with you at a later date. That would help you and the government to really have a view in terms of the feedback from your excellent presentation that you've just done for us here. Thank you very much for that. And may I compliment you on one particular item which I heard in the first webinar that was organized here. That was basically saying that it's time to change the name of the RAs. And I'm very happy to see that you already changed it to human resource agents. So that sounds slightly better than recruitment agents. So somebody wanted human resource and skills to be talked about. But anyway, that's at least we've gotten off on a good start. So thank you for that and congratulations on starting this new system. May I now request Dr. Fräulein Mallet, who's from Cambridge. He's a leading expert in migration, presently based in the UAE, and he will share with us some of his views in terms of the Abu Dhabi dialogue that he's been associated with, as well as his whole system and his research that he does on migration. Thank you very much, Doctor. Please go right ahead.
Thank you very much, Dr. Singh, and to the organizers of India Migration Now, and thank you all for having me. So my presentations look at the India Gulf Migration Corridor, specifically looking at the broader trends and the Gulf labor market, specifically looking at the sectoral performance, Gulf state policy responses, and the future scenarios for ascending countries like India in the long run. So there are four key broad trends that I actually wanted to highlight. One, COVID cases are continuing to rise in the Gulf countries, as a lot of Gulf countries have increasingly reopened their markets and lifted internal mobility restrictions and curfews, which still pose a lot of public health risks to a lot of migrants and host countries. Second, GCC economies are projected to decline by 7.6% by the IMF. And if the price of hydrocarbon and oil don't go up, then Gulf states' fiscal budget for 2020 and in the future will also likely be impacted. So for example, Saudi Arabia cut 13 billion from their fiscal budget this year alone. Kuwait cut 20% from their fiscal budget this year. Oman cut 10%. And these actually have direct implications on the private sector and the kinds of employment opportunities that are being extended to migrant workers. The third trend is actually the growing push for localization across, public and private sector. So for example, you can see this in the case of Kuwait and Oman. And I'll go into that very quickly shortly. And the last one is actually, as COVID cases intensify, you could see Gulf countries extending a lot of support to banks and private sector to, help them liquidate a lot of their assets, etc. But the problem is that this still creates a lot of massive unemployment, actually. Now, with respect to the Gulf labor market itself, a lot of the policy and academic studies have highlighted the negative impact of COVID across sectors in the Gulf. So, for example, you can see this a lot in a lot of labor-intensive jobs. For example, in the case of hospitality, construction, real estate, that hire a lot of migrant workers. And based on a lot of studies at the moment, there's a lot of massive wage cuts and rise of part-time work, actually. And the power of a lot of employers to set wages at a very minimal rate, actually. And so the negative impact has been heavily recorded, but at the same time, positive impact has also been recorded in other sectors. So, for example, healthcare, you could see retail industry, the food sector, home deliveries, digital services, pharmaceutical, telecom, traditional media entertainment, logistics, utilities. And that's very interesting because COVID, may have created all these unemployment, but also it shifted different types of labor demands actually, within the Gulf labor market. So, for example, a lot of Filipinos in the case of, cleaning companies, a lot of them, they used to work as domestic workers and they ended up working in cleaning companies. So shifting sort of like different kinds of jobs for a lot of low-skilled workers within the Gulf market. You could also see this actually in the case of Gulf state policy responses. So if you look at the stimulus packages that they've injected, so for example, UAE, for example, injected 34 billion, Saudi 13 billion, Oman offered zero interest rates, for example, to small and medium enterprises. But the problem is that these, stimulus packages plans are still being observed, and the economic effects haven't been unfolded actually. So it's very much difficult to see whether these stimulus packages have created employment or have rejuvenated the market. And the other point that I want to highlight too is the Gulf states' attempt to extend wage support in the private sector. Now the problem here is that Gulf states mainly subsidize wages for locals, not for expatriates, and that created a lot of implications in the private sector. Another policy state responses for a lot of Gulf countries are the repatriation that you're seeing at the moment. And India is facing a lot of these challenges. And in the Gulf, the logic is that high migration population constitutes high risks. So Gulf countries like UAE, Kuwait, Bahrain have implemented amnesty schemes in order to reduce proportion of migrant workers, specifically those undocumented and those who live in high-risk accommodation spaces, and those who are actually on a tourist visa, or those who are actually stuck in the Gulf countries. And more, I also want to answer the restrictionist approaches. And as a response to the COVID-19, Gulf countries like Kuwait, for example, passed a migration quota, setting a quota in terms of the proportion of migrants who can be allowed to stay in the Gulf country. And these are actually not new policies. These policies have been there pre-COVID, but now COVID has actually intensifying them, triggering a lot of these countries to slowly phase out migrants. Saudi and Oman have also passed a lot of crackdown and deportation schemes. However, in the case of UAE and Qatar, you could see more leniency. They don't do much of these policing aspect, partly because of the upcoming events that are engaged in. You can name UAE Expo 2021 and the World Cup for 2022. Now, if you look at the scenario now in the Gulf countries, so the Gulf labor market, it's challenged heavily, and state is struggling to inject more funds to stabilize the market. So there are, 4 possible scenarios that you could see within the next 6 months if the status quo stays the same. So number one, you could see more declining of fiscal budget actually for a lot of Gulf countries. And that again would impact the mega infrastructure projects that they actually are involved in. So I'll give you an example. Saudi has cut $8 billion from their Vision 2030 actually in order to stabilize their budget, because these mega infrastructure projects create a lot of private sector jobs, hotel, in the construction, in retail, etc. So expect more of these, declining fiscal budget from Gulf countries. The second, more unemployment and again, more repatriation. And this will be exacerbated by the intensity of localization policies, both in the public and private sector. Oman's finance ministry has indicated this, and the Kuwait government's localization policy in the public sector. And this will impact the future of employment for sending countries like India, because this will actually shape the kind of labor demands or mutual skills qualifications or training that will be necessary to fill in the future labor shortage for the Gulf markets, using, Indian migrant populations. The third thing is actually more state-led restrictions and policing activities. Again, the migration quotas and the work permit suspension. This is in the case of Bahrain, where they actually imposed a 5-month work permit suspension already. The crackdowns, the amnesties, these will be actually the future norm that you could see within the next few months, actually, in the Gulf.
Dr. Malit, could you now tie up?
Lastly, the economic strategies. Well, Gulf countries have also used, different economic strategies like VAT policies setting it at 15% for next year. High cost of work permit renewals, penalty structures, and high rents will also push a lot of migrants out actually within the next few months. Now, my last point actually with regards to Abu Dhabi dialogue, I think sending countries like India need to maximize these interstate consultative dialogue processes. And what's missing and what's lacking actually from these processes is the coordinated, policy database between sending and receiving countries. And I think initiatives from India Migration Now could really create that policy scorecard that could really help them better understand and better prepare, for, the kinds of interstate initiatives regarding skills and training, mutual qualifications, or even, collection of policy data that will be useful for Indian policymakers, researchers, and advocates in the long run. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Doctor. You've given us a really good insider's view on the whole Gulf situation, which does not look very promising at all. But yes, the point you've made about policy dialogue and making sure that we get the right research done on it is a very good point, and I'm sure that India Migration Now and other representatives here on today's seminar will heed your warning and your suggestion and will make something out of it. I now have Nawzad, who's a very famous and important migration expert at the global level. He works for the International Center for Migration and Policy Development, which is a very important center based out of Europe. He represents the India-EU Cooperation Dialogue on Migration and Mobility, and I hope that he'll be able to share some of his views and give us how he thinks we in India and we in Asia can actually handle this particular pandemic situation as it is. Now, Nawzad, please go right ahead. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, and I hope everyone can hear me. Didar, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for your expert navigation of this panel. Yogi, also great to see you and hear you, and I really appreciated some of the comments that have been made thus far by our fellow panelists. As already mentioned, my role here is to give you a bit of a different flavor, a different look to a new horizon, a destination that has perhaps not been exposed or maximized to its great potential, Europe and the European Union. And agents, or now we call them human resource agents, can really think about Europe as the new panacea, the new future, the new frontier, if you will. It doesn't mean that we don't have Indian migration coming to Europe. We do. But there are a few points I would like to make in this presentation that I have a few short minutes with you. The first and foremost is that EU-India mobility, as has already been mentioned in day one, can be maximized greater than it already is currently undergoing. Secondly, that there is a several long list of initiatives that are in place for recruitment agencies, as well as the government of Ministry of External Affairs, and of course the different entities within the OIA, to take advantage of this opportunity and to see whether the future is indeed an India-European bilateral trade labor corridor. The third is that, of course, more can be done, but that the change, of course, needs to come from the recruitment agents, and the necessary different look to the prism of how migration can go to Europe as opposed to what it's been like for the GCC countries. I think it's extremely important for HRAs to think differently, to act differently, and to understand that the profile of person that flies and comes to Europe to work here is very different from that we have been used to over the last 30, 40, 50 years as the continent, Indian subcontinent. Myself, of course, as has been presented, work for the International Center for Migration Policy Development and have had the privilege over the last 3 years to really work with the European Union and the Ministry of External Affairs on this corridor. So what I would like to do is, of course, briefly share with you some of the ongoing initiatives that I've mentioned that are in place, that are in need of taking stock of and to maximize to its full potential. So if I was a recruitment agent today, if I was a human resource agent today, I would be very, very excited about the future that Europe offers. Why? Because the European Union has 27 member states. It has a harmonized condition procedure. It has common rights and privileges for labor migrants who come into Europe. They have simplified procedures. They have improved legal capacities and certainty and predictability for workers. They have improved intra-EU mobility. So if you think about all those conditions, this should be the most tempting and exciting opportunity in panacea for Europe, for Indians, recruitment agents for the future. How do I come across that assessment? Well, if you look at the framework that exists for legal migration to Europe, I'm just going to name a few. The first is the Students and Researchers Directive. The second is the Intra-Company Transferees Directive. What does that offer? An intercompany transferee is someone that is employed by an Indian company that has a branch in Europe and that wishes to come and send its staff member to Europe. That individual not only has the privilege of being able to bring his or her family, but they can, of course, look into the possibility of working in a second European member state. Which country in the world, which destination in the world, market-wise, can offer this kind of flexibility and privilege? Additionally, you have the Blue Card Directive, which many of you may have not heard of because it's not fully utilized and fully maximized to its potential. At the moment, for example, 33,000 blue cards are being issued on an annual basis in Europe, and Indians are #1 to receive that. But many of the RAs are not aware of this, and we need to be thinking about this. This is a program that allows for highly skilled migrants from India to be able to come to Europe. Additionally, unlike in the GCC, where we have been used to living with a lack of a long-term plan, unable to really be certain of your future, in Europe you have a great deal of certainty when it comes to the number of years of residency required to then be able to hold a long-term residency card. 5 years. Again, that's part of the long-term residency directive. When you think about coming with your family, this isn't a privilege that an employer bestows upon you and takes away when he or she sees fit. In Europe, you are allowed to come with your family, and those individuals do have the right to work and live with you. And finally, of course, there is the Seasonal Workers Directive, not applied throughout the European Union with consistency, but it's important to understand that as recruitment agents, there is a potential you have to look into the future for seasonal workers who are desperately needed in light of the COVID pandemic. Now, I have not touched upon what the impact has been in Europe of the COVID pandemic, and I think that is really because I wanted to first lay out the framework for you, what is existing in Europe. There's been an uneven death toll of the impact of COVID. We all know that. We can hear that. We see the numbers throughout the various media channels. But what's important is that the vulnerable and most disadvantaged have been the most affected. And these have created a demand for healthcare workers. One of the greatest suppliers of healthcare workers, of course, is our Indian subcontinent, is the country of India. Most visa consular services are currently on a temporary limited capacity, but there is an exemption. There is an exemption for health and medical workers and family reunification, as well as student mobility. When you think about the impact of COVID on Europe, those who are currently on a work permit or those who have a current residence visa can automatically renew their visa without any additional payments or penalties. And when you think about the response to GCC countries that Mr. Florian, our predecessor, just mentioned in the panel, the European member states have been a lot more forthcoming and a lot more supportive of those individuals that are considered migrant workers or migrant students. For example, in Germany and Ireland, they have received financial support for those who have lost their work due to the COVID pandemic. Now, with the remaining of my time, I want to tell you a little bit about the work that we as ICMPD are doing to improve the visibility and future for this corridor, the EU-India corridor. We're doing this in partnership with the European Union under the project that has already been mentioned by my esteemed panel head, Mr. Didar Singh. And what we have done is, with the help of local partners, with local experts, we have developed a baseline report that is able to offer you a clear vision on what is the current mobility patterns, who is going and who's not going. So it's very important to understand that this is very different from the GCC channel that we have all been used to. 52% of Indian migrants in Europe are female, as opposed to the male-dominated transfers. You have about 44,000 permits being issued on an annual basis to Indians at the moment for employment. That has a large potential to grow. We have about 8,000 blue cards being issued. I've already mentioned that's a system that is really available to the most highly skilled. And you have countries like Germany, as well as others, that are looking into expanding how that membership.
Thank you. Now, Zad, we'll have to run. Can you tie up now?
Sure thing. We're looking at different countries such as Germany, Netherlands, Sweden, Poland, France, trying to increase their footprint in India, trying to see if there's a potential for additional migration from India to Europe. Let's look at the labor mobility partnership schemes that are in place, the human resource mobility partnerships that have been signed, as well as the social security agreements that are in place. These are all established by the Ministry of External Affairs, OIA, and are available for all of you to be able to look at very carefully and closely. When you think about the potential that the European Union offers, let's not also forget that there is short-term and long-term. If you look at, for example, in 2018, 2019, the short-term permits issued were about 12 to 13,000. Long-term were about 31 to 32,000. So again, here, a lot of potential for growth, increased opportunities. My last thought is, what can India do to tap into the EU market? And here, I'm very happy to see some of the presentation key points that Yogi has mentioned, but I would like to encourage us to all think about improving our knowledge and awareness of what the European market has, and to develop studies or pilot schemes that can look more closely at the needs of member states. What are the skills recognition opportunities? What are the challenges for skills recognition and job experience? And look more closely at which sectors need the support from India, whilst which sectors are already exemplified. Finally, let's use and be aware of the information that is available publicly through SEDEFPOP and through other websites that the European Union has available. I would be happy to share them with you. I thank you, Didar, for your time. I hope I've been able to touch upon briefly the European.
Thank you, Nauzad. You really have, while we see a sunset in the Gulf, we see a sunrise in Europe, and definitely this is something that is worth looking at more seriously. And now that the RAs will be human resource agents, they can begin to look at this opportunity in a specific manner. But it's an opportunity which is based on skills. And so we really welcome for us with here Mr. Arun Kumar Pillai, who's from the National Skills Development Corporation, NSDC, which is really leading this entire thing. And in fact, we started discussion with them some 7 years ago on how they can promote Indian skilled persons to be able to go to different parts of the world. So Mr. Pillai will tell us more about it. Thank you very much, Mr. Arun Kumar Pillai. Welcome to being here, and thank you for sharing your views with us. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I have a brief presentation. Rohini, can you put it up?
Yes. Mr. Pillai, are you able to share your screen? If not, our team will share it from here.
I'm unable to. Yeah, now I am able. Sorry. Yeah.
Great.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Good evening to all my fellow panelists and the other participants. I'll speak briefly on the role of skilling and what NSDC has been doing for the last few years. From 3 perspectives. One is what we are doing on the demand side. Second, of course, on the supply side. And lastly, how we are trying to put this together, trying to match the demand to the supply. On the demand side, we started with a global skill gap study in 2019. And we basically identified, rather categorized the countries for international workforce migration for India into 3. The first, of course, is the GCC piece. And the assessment is that over the next 5 years, we're seeing a sectoral demand of around 2.63 million. This, of course, is a pre-COVID estimate. And as one of the panelists spoke of, we need to temper it considering the fact that there is a slowdown. The major sectors, of course, remain construction, manufacturing, wholesale, trade, and transport. And we studied 3 countries, that is UAE, Saudi, and Qatar. The EU countries, which the other panelists spoke about, another potential sector demand will be saw around 0.3 million. And the sectors, healthcare, social care, manufacturing, accommodation, and food and construction. And we studied 5 countries, UK, Germany, Switzerland, Sweden, Netherlands. Finally, the third category which we spoke of is countries with mature migration systems, the ones which have had migration for quite long and they have a point system. And this is where it's likely to be around likely to be 1 million people demand. Sectors again remain healthcare and social care, construction, manufacturing, agriculture. The countries we studied are the listed ones listed. Overall, it seems there's an opportunity around 4 million over 5 years. And again, as one of the panelists did speak, there are 6 models of migration we find. First is, of course, apprenticeship, which I will speak about vaguely, trade partnerships, mobility partnerships, seasonal or cyclical employments, of course, student partnerships, and then employer RA partnerships, where people go on jobs, etc. So 6 models to make people migrate to this set of countries. And the recommendations from the study, so they suggested that GCC countries, of course, establish equivalence between our standards and the proposed standards in these countries, set up testing centers and PPP model, that is public-private partnership model, use experience of the Gulf returning workforce as trainers in such skill ecosystem, and of course work with MEA on issues related to these migrant workers. With respect to EU countries, the study suggested that we identify the sectors, prioritize them, work B2B, that is identify the industry as such partners in the destination nations, simultaneously or parallelly work out the G2G interactions for any policy level change, map standards, and then fix up the migrant model, the way the people would go to these countries, sign MOUs and conduct pilots and scale up. And lastly, for the countries with mature migration systems, this has been going on for some time. They have been Singapore or Canada. They use various points based for migration. So it was meant that some of this could be simplified and so initiate G2G interactions here and do not interfere with the model, but support it for migration. With this in mind, we have done certain things. So I thought we'd put it up here. On the GCC side, what we just spoke about, the equivalence for the qualifications established for 5 trades with Takamul, Saudi Arabia. And I think it's this month or by the end of this month, we would have assessment centers of 5 trades in 5 cities. And we are releasing the RFP for this among our India International Skills Center network partners. Similarly, for UAE, we have established equivalence of 15 trades. And this is expected to go up both with Saudi and UAE and the other Gulf states we will be connecting as this goes forward. On the EU side, the sector which has been identified is healthcare, social care, and IT, which is the one which is the focus. The healthcare mapping for the job roles for qualification equivalence has been done for 12 countries. Key job roles are geriatric care assistant, pharmacy assistant, and the likes. We have a pilot which is going on, which we have just begun on nursing apprenticeship with Germany. I'll speak briefly on that. We are working with some hospitals in Germany where it's not possible for nurses to go at this point in Germany, but Germany is willing to accept the nursing apprentices. So our students are right now they are learning German. So key thing is to learn the foreign language, and post that they would go and work with these 5 hospitals which have been identified in Germany as apprentice. The salary levels are sufficiently good enough, around £1 lakh in Indian terms, with good savings potential. And so that's something which we have begun the pilot. Sweden, the focus is on IT professionals. Again, the discussion is on how we could actually train and send IT professionals. In terms of countries with mature migration system, the Japan TITP program is on. Around 190 candidates are interning in Japan on a 4-year term. Similarly, we are talking with Betasys, and this first pilot has been planned for the horticulture sector. Foreign language training is the other big thing which needs to be promoted in the country. It is whether it's Japanese, German, and when we say English, it's not the conversational English, it's about reaching levels of 5 to 8 for this kind of migration. Moving to supply side initiatives, what we have done is we have tried to aggregate the training and assessment capacities in India under the pillar of India International Skills Center. What we propose is this would be a set of partners and institutions with which NSDC and the rest of the government ecosystem would support in terms of providing knowledge research, facilitation, skill standard benchmarking, harmonization, advocacy, branding, some kind of demand aggregation, creating some loans. We are also working with NBFCs for creating financial fintech companies for creating loans for some of these candidates. Of course, some operating guidelines when it comes to assessment, etc. And an IT platform which will help with data management and monitoring. So far, we have 93 members who are part of this ISC network. And these 93 members have 513 India International Skills Centers across the country. 234 districts are covered. Last two years, annually, members have placed around 40,000 people in markets. And our members are in UP, Punjab, Rajasthan, Kerala, and Maharashtra, and the top sectors are construction, electronics, tourism, hospitality, retail, IT. In addition to this, there is the whole pivot centers. Today, 3 pivot centers are there. The target is to own 12 more, and more these pivot centers will also be brought under the ISC network. So India International Skills Network would be an aggregated supply side of the Indian labor market. And if you look at this 513 India International Skills Centers, 54 of them are in districts which send 5,000 plus people, and the rest tells me 146 districts send 100 to 500 people. Last piece is about matching the demand and supply. Once we have got the demand in place in terms of assessment, in terms of the study, and then we are working towards working with the countries closely to have the demand. The supply side in place in aggregation through the India International Skills Center network. Last piece is what we are trying to still not got it fully. This is about matching the demand and supply through some IT solutions. So we see on the supply side, we have this 93 members with 513 centers. At the demand side, we are looking at some kind of international workforce mobility platform, some kind of IT portal for efficient tracking of this. Because we know that there are challenges in this in terms of limited outreach, a lack of transparency, and there is a whole load of migration uncertified workforce, and there's a limited use of technology. So we are exploring a B2B IT solution in the form of some kind of mobility platform that could seamlessly connect. It is not to disintermediate, it is to bring everybody on platform. Today, what I understood, recruitment agents are going to human resource agents, get them on platform, get the employers, suppliers, vendors, and partners across geographies on a single platform. This is something which we are working on, which is still in progress. Yeah, that's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pillai. You are excellent. I think you've really shown us the tremendous work that NSDC has done. May I request that this presentation of yours again be shared with India Migration Now so that they can share it with the other participants. This is really very excellent stuff which is happening, and there will be questions to you later in the day, and I hope you'll be in a position to answer them. May I now request the next person on the panel? We have Mr. Bhardwaj. Mr. Bhardwaj is not only a very old and seasoned recruiting agent, but he's also vice chairman of the Federation of Indian Immigrants Management Council and Associations. This is a leading recruiting agent federation, and we're happy to have Mr. Bhardwaj here. Kindly share your views with us, Mr. Bhardwaj. Dhanyavad. Please unmute yourself, Bhardwaj साहब. अपने उसको जरा unmute कर दीजिए.
Yes, Bhardwaji, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Yeah, it's unmuted now. Thank you, Bhardwaj साहब. बोलिए.
Thank you, sir. I will concentrate only on one issue, which is the urgent and immediate requirement at this particular time.
जी हाँ.
The essence of this is that we have to restart the work which has been stopped for the last 6 months. Deployment of the people start again, going back to their jobs. Only person who can handle this issue is the recruiting agent. There is no one else who is going to help to send these people back. The recruiting agents needs to be encouraged in every respect so that he can freely and frankly put his efforts to see that maximum number of people start going back again and taking their job. This may be the new fresh people, these may be the people who have come back, but the difficulty which is coming now is the recruiting agencies, because of this COVID for the last 6 months, there has been no business with them. They have lost everything. Most of them are closed. and therefore they need an immediate financial relief. Now, we don't expect any government of India or anybody else to give any financial relief. My only suggestion is that we have 50 lakhs rupees deposited in the bank against bank guarantee. The Protector General of Immigrants has recently said that he has half the guarantee amount, but that's not going to help at all. It is what I need is remove all the slabs of this recruiting guarantee and make only one small slab of 5 lakhs rupees for each recruiting agent who is registered, and release that 45 lakhs rupees again, so that they can have sufficient funds to restart and do the job whatever they want to do. They have not been paying their salaries, their staff. They have to bring back all the people, pay their wages and all sorts of things, then again start traveling to the foreign countries for procuring the jobs. Today's conference webinar, people who have spoken earlier have given a very, very good perspective for future. What we need is today how we can do that. My second point on this is that the banks, once it is agreed, the banks should be instructed that do not charge any penalty charges by premature cancellation of their fixed deposits. Third thing is that GST should be waived so that the burden on the candidate for paying service charge is reduced. Third thing, like recruiting agents, the people who are supposed to go back, they have no money also. They have lost everything. So they are not able to pay their service charges at all. Now, though, to run the show, recruiting agent also cannot waive the service charge because he is also in the same position. So what my suggestion is that government should approach the banks to provide loans to the workers who wish to be joining the new jobs over there, and then see that things can move properly. Similarly, as I said, the GST should be waived off, and I have nothing else to say at this moment. Only I am concentrating on this point. Thank you very much for giving an opportunity to talk.
Thank you, Bhadwaj Saab. On behalf of the agents, you have raised some really key issues on how to restart the situation. I'm sure the Protector General of Immigrants will look at your suggestions seriously. In any case, we from India Migration will send these suggestions to him. Though I can only add that you were mentioning that you wanted to really have only one suggestion, which is this guarantee money to be used for each of you to have that money back to push your business. But you have given some 4 or 5 different suggestions. Let's hear now Mr. Sandeep Kapoor. He is the vice chairman of the other organization that deals with migration, which is called the Association of Overseas Recruiting Agents. Kapoor Saab, aap kya bolna mangenge? What is it that you think should be done to ensure that this pandemic era is now replaced by a good, solid migration era that we saw in the past? Thank you very much. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Singh, for inviting me to share my thoughts here. And good evening to all the panelists over here. Actually, I would like to concentrate more towards the policy side, since this webinar of ours is today addressing the policy side. And our PG, Mr. Sangwan, has also shared a very good presentation on the present act as well as the new proposed act. So I would like to just concentrate on the policy part of it, as Mr. Bhardwaj, being a very senior RA, has already put forward the immediate relief that all the RAs across India are seeking. So I'll restrict myself to the policy part only. Mr. Sangwan and Dr. Singh would probably, they are much aware, as Dr. Singh has already headed this division in his times. So obviously he's also aware, and Mr. Sangwan, although he has joined at a very critical stage, I mean, when the pandemic was at its peak, and he didn't get much time to get into the groove and settle down. And from day one, we have been putting one request or the other to him, and he has been kind to, give us all his ears and provide relief, whatever, in his capacity he could at the immediate stage itself. And just one request I have on the BG, that the relief that he has given us till March 21, that should be extended in due course of time. That is one part. Now coming back to the act, sir, this 1983 Act actually was formulated. That was the first act on immigration here. Before that, there was no registration for any RAs or anything. And anyone who wanted to send people abroad could just send them without any registration. And a need was felt probably because it was going completely unregulated. So an act was formulated in 1983, which, specified that who needs registration, how things to be done. But according to the RAs now, since a lot of research has been done in last few years, and Dr. Singh's tenure at FICCI also helped us to have some webinar meetings, and some research was done over the present act. And probably that is the need that the government is also thinking to completely change the act now. They are not thinking about any just modification or any new notification in the act. They are completely going in for revamping the act and replacing it with the new act. Now in the old act, sir, there is some ambiguity on the role of RA. Although in the act it is written that at the time of some difficulties faced by immigrants, I mean, leave alone the difficulties faced by immigrants during a force majeure like a pandemic like this, or wars in Iraq or Kuwait earlier. But even in normal times, the role of RA was limited in the act as just, if I'll quote from the act, RA was supposed to make a best endeavor to solve these problems if an immigrant is facing a problem in the host in the country of employment. But over the period of time, certain modifications was done through in the rules. Certain things were ordered, was issued just as an executive orders, and some of them were very much required. Some of them were sometimes a knee-jerk request, reaction to a particular situation. And because of that, now this regulation of RAs has become over-regulation of RAs. And now when we are talking about facilitating the RAs, facilitating the entire process of, smooth recruitment process for the immigrants, we are looking for new countries. Now this act actually basically controls only 17 ECR countries. Now we are targeting ECNR countries as well. So this act needs to be a balance between all the players who are involved in this recruitment, and especially after the merger of this Ministry of Overseas Indian Affairs to MEA. The primary motive which we feel was so that MEA could facilitate the immigrants in the country of employment, as they are the first source and they have the powers. I mean, now so many things are expected from RAs, whereas RAs per se don't have any powers in a foreign country of employment. And whether we like it or we don't like it, it's a known fact that all the rules and regulations of the employment country would be applicable over the immigrant and the employer itself. Now, unfortunately, in last many years, a lot of thrust has been put over the RA itself. And in the process of controlling the RA, which is in direct control of our ministry, we have probably overlooked the role of all the other, participants who can be involved and who should be involved for any kind of grievances. And in fact, mission can even facilitate the process rather than being an impediment. Since when this e-migrate was implemented, in first few years, we saw a lot of problems in FEs being registered through the Indian missions on e-migrate. And we had to have too many sessions to to solve that problem. Some of them are solved. Some of them, like minimum referral wages and all, they are still pending. Although the PG has asked us and given us an assurance that the government is looking into it, which we have been, receiving since last 4 years. But any which ways, the role of RA should be limited and the role of missions should be specified. Right now, the role played by the missions is they are just simply receiving the complaint or whatever request from the immigrant, and they just pass it on to the concerned POE, PG, or to the RA to solve that the complaint of the immigrant without going into the details whether it is a genuine complaint or not, whether the RA has any liability towards that or not, whether the complaint is against the RA or whether the complaint actually is in against the employer or what. They don't go into it. And there are a lot of online facilities like helpline numbers like Madad and OWRC, which are already there. As PG is saying that Mr. Sangwan just said in his presentation that they are going to come up with helpline numbers. Most of them already exist in ECR countries. But what is happening is, just if you allow me a minute, there is a really classic example of a complaint being registered just few days back by a mission in Jeddah, wherein the candidate was recruited 5 years back by the RA. He passed away due to some natural causes or some accident. Now he sent his family from India. They sent their, request to the mother platform, and mother forwarded to the concerned mission in Jeddah with all the details of the employer. But mission, rather than doing anything, they just raised a grievance against the RA. They found out from the record that who did the immigration clearance for that particular candidate, and they raised it as a grievance and sent it back to the POE to take action. Now, this is the classic example how RA is going to solve this, whereas the actual complaint by the immigrant's family was to find out what happened and to help to bring the body back. Now, this is the classic case where employer, this RA has been asked to perform a role probably of a Superman as of now in present times, to bring a body back without having any support from any flights or something like that. So there has to be a mechanism, an SOP, and a role of RA should be very clearly defined in the new Immigration Management Act. And we cannot overlook the role of the mission. And now in present times, since insurance is mandatory, what are we doing to regulate the insurance companies? I mean, it's fine. You want to regulate us as much as you want. But ultimately, we have to take care of the welfare of the immigrant, as he is the most, needed person of a welfare as of now. What are we doing for that? Insurance companies are going scot-free. They are receiving crores and crores of rupees as insurance premiums, and minuscule amount. I mean, it's in percentage times, it's even difficult to calculate that what they are giving it as compensations to the, people who actually need it. So what are we doing for that? I'll request Mr. Sangwan to, call all the insurance companies or representatives from IDI to his office, and we can have a together meeting with them, and we can find out and probably promulgate a policy which is helpful to all the immigrants and in need of times. Insurance companies should bear the time. I mean, if they want, the premium can be increased. There is no dispute over that. But insurance companies are actually finding a way not to give the compensation which is due to the immigrant. Now, if an immigrant has to come back, there is an insurance which we already take for him in present times as well. But ministry will put a direct pressure on the RA will bring it back, and the insurance companies will go scot-free. And now, since we are targeting Dr. Singh and to the ECNR countries as well in Europe and all, we all know how costly the medical treatments and cost of repatriation will be much higher than what it is presently in GCC countries. I mean, GCC countries in times not during a pandemic, we can bring a person back in about 10,000-15,000 rupees. But to bring back a person from European country would cost a bomb. And what about the cost of money that the employer is paying to bring that immigrant into his country? I mean, even he is spending a lot of money. And one more thing, sir, that the immigrant himself has not been made responsible enough. We should understand that it is a contract, employment. It is not a permanent employment. And you will be surprised that in the employment contract, there is no responsibility of the immigrant which has been fixed. I mean, he is free to break the contract any times, raise a frivolous grievance against the RA or the employer, and whenever he wishes to come back to see his family, or if he's homesick or whatever, the RA is made a scapegoat and is being asked to bring them back.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sandeep ji. I think you've made some very, very relevant points, very important points, especially about this whole question of managing complaints. And I'm sure the PG will react to some of these as we get on.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. Thank you.
I'll now request
thank you.
Amit Saxena ji. Amit Saxena, as you know, is not only a very important person in the whole migration chain, but he's also a director of FIMCA and an advisor with India Migration Now. And he moderated day one, where we can hear from him, I think, some of the key issues that was shared in day one, which the PG may like to also hear about. Thank you, Amit ji. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Didar Singh, for the kind words, sir. And good evening to all the panelists. Thank you, India Immigration Now, for inviting me for this day two. The first day, as Dr. Singh mentioned, was exciting. We had a lot of private sector participation. We had the ILO in the session. And I'm speaking to you today. I'm very happy to note that I'm speaking to you today as an HRA, as a human resource agent, and not a recruitment agent. Thank you, Sangwan Sahab, for this positive upgrade to our titles, and it really is. It comes very genuinely. Before I start sharing some learnings from our previous session, I want to set the context as to why this change in title is very important, sir. It's not only about, it's not only nomenclature. Fact is that this industry of overseas recruitment has been working for over 40 years. Our senior, Mr. Bharadwaj, you know, he looks younger than he probably is. There are people over here who have recruited thousands of people. They've recruited them ethically. They've recruited them legally. I believe, you know, extrapolation will tell us that this industry has recruited over 3 crore candidates in the last 40 years. Now, that's no mean feat. 3 crore people multiplied by their families, multiplied by the forex remittances, which come back to India as their salaries, is huge. And over the last 5 to 6 years since we've had e-migrate, if you look at the number of grievances that have been raised against licensed, we're still called RAs, so against licensed RAs, you'll find that the grievances are less than 0.001%. You know, even in a quality management system, you will find that that is a very, very low defect ratio, sir. So this has to be recognition, and if the recognition comes by way of a title upgrade to HRA, then that's welcome, sir. I'm also very happy to note that, you know, in the notes of the new Emigration bill, it's said that the regulation is set to go down and the emphasis is on facilitation. You've also called RAs the backbone. I'm thankful to you for having said this, sir. This is very important in the post-COVID reality. And why is that? You know, my fellow panelist, Mr. Froylan, has talked about how companies are hurting, right? Companies in India are hurting, companies in the Middle East are hurting. All countries across the board have unemployment. The receiving countries have unemployment. They're hiring more locals. That is set to go up. Sending countries like ours, India has unemployment. And really, there's going to be a lot of competition for any country which wants to receive workers. There's going to be competition from all the sending countries. That includes India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. All the countries are going to be willing to send their candidates. And the country that will succeed in sending more candidates is the one that makes it easier to send their immigrants. The country that makes it faster to send their immigrants. Countries which make their salaries more competitive. And this is no longer, this is an imperative, sir. This is no longer a good to have. It's an imperative because we are now in a multinational world where there is unemployment across countries and across people. We need the authorities to enable us rather than stopping us. We need them to incentivize us instead of penalizing us. And I request the policymakers to please appreciate that we are on the same side, sir. We want to recruit more people. We want to do them, recruit them in a safer way, in a legal way. Just as you have given us a new title, sir, I have a new title suggested for the POE. Think about promoting the immigrant rather than protecting the immigrant. You know, the PGE or the POE won't change much, but promotion of immigrants, I think, should be the way of the future. That is what the new act should encourage. And I have only 3 specific suggestions, sir, if I can just take a little bit more of your time. The first is my colleague, Mr. Sandeep, and my senior, Mr. Bharadwaj, have already talked about the liabilities and the grievances of the recruitment agents. In no industry can, you know, I've seen which operates with unlimited liability of a business. There has to be a statute of limitations on every grievance that is raised for the recruitment agent. They should include who can raise the complaint. Often the people raising the complaint have no relationship with the actual immigrant. You know, there should be a KYC. There should be a time period for which, you know, the RA is responsible for the grievance. There should be a limitation on the compensation. There should be an involvement of the mission in helping us resolve the complaint. You know, just raising a grievance and routing it the way Sandeep said, this is a fact of life, and we are facing it even during this COVID time, sir. You know, a lot of agents are actually receiving complaints for issues which, you know, most companies in India have already declared force majeure. You know, we should be helped in this time, sir. We should not be penalized, or grievances should not be coming up. Specific suggestion on the liabilities is to please help us coordinate with the IRDA. We're reaching out as private bodies, as federations and associations to create a product that will replace the bank guarantee and take care of our liabilities and grievances. Very, very specific suggestion. Point number 2, by the way, this was actually also the biggest point raised during day 1. Across the board, sir, every recruiter has an issue with the liabilities that are being placed on them. It stops our business from being professionalized. It stops our business from being passed down to the next generation, because people don't want to do this business because of unlimited liabilities being placed on the RA, including criminal liability. You know, there is even the ROC now doesn't have any criminal liabilities in there. Even tax laws have been reformed so that criminal liabilities are not being placed because of minor issues. My request is that the new act should not have any criminal liabilities placed on the RA. Point number 2, sir, is simpler. It's a smaller point. It's ease of business. You know, please help us reduce paperwork. Things like licenses for new branches, license renewals. These should all be digitally done online. There should be a time period for approvals. If approvals are not received within that time period, they should, you know, it should be deemed approvals. You know, this is, we're in 2020, we're not in 1990, sir. And my request is, already there is a lot of digitization that's happened in the POE process. My request is that even licensing, renewals are all taken online so that it's done in a time-phased manner. Someone in the last session asked, sir, you know, why do candidates or immigrants go to unlicensed agents? Right? The consensus amongst the panel at that point was, if it was easier for us to create branch offices, then we would have opened branch offices even in UP and Bihar. But today, even opening a branch office, you know, we have to come to Delhi to get our paperwork approved, sir. And these are the things that stop us from actually expanding our business India-wide. They stop us from opening offices in different places, and give rise to other people who do the recruitment on our behalf. And lastly, sir, and this is more immediate, this was also a big point which came out of our first day session. There are quite a few, you know, this is the good news, by the way, you know, it's not all doom and gloom like, you know, Mr. Froylan was saying about the Middle East. A lot of the recruiters do seem to have a lot of demand from the Middle East right now. You know, between the 4 panelists that day, we counted a few thousand positions, apparently. But they cannot recruit people because of complexities to do with healthcare protocols, to do with visas, physical visas versus digital visas. How do you get them stamped? Which visas are being issued or not being issued? Air travel rules. You know, wherever there is no air travel bubble, there's a lot of complexity in how people can or cannot travel. Even the process of interviews, you know, some clients, despite the move to a digital world, do not want to do interviews online. How do we hold interviews? What is the procedure? How do we get protection from harassment by the police and by the local state government?
Thank you.
So that's all that I had for today, sir. Thank you so much for your kind words. I am going to spread the word that we will now call ourselves HRAs instead of RAs, sir. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I must thank all the panelists. You have raised really very relevant issues, very valid issues. In fact, there is a large amount of questions which have come up on the Q&A, and I'm going to now request Rohini to try and formulate some kind of, I have listed down some of them, but many of them are there, and I'd really request the PG first, Ambassador Sangwan, to kindly respond to some of the questions which have come up, and I'll raise some of them which are directly related to Mr. Sangwan. One, of course, is what Amit was just mentioning in terms of looking at possibly even the change of the name of POE to promotion of immigrants. I mean, believe me, something, Amit, it's much easier to change private sector names. You can't change government names. It's really tough, but let Ambassador Sangwan react to that. You have mentioned many other things in terms of statute of limitations, criminal liabilities, ease of doing business. All these are very relevant issues, and I would request that based on what was there in the first day and what has been mentioned today, India Migration now may like to compile some of these and formally share them with Ambassador Sangwan so that he can actually have a look at addressing some of these issues as the new bill begins to come up. Sangwan Saab, may I mention to you that there are some specific questions directed to you, and I'll read some of them. For example, can the present reduction of the bank guarantee be made permanent and not be just kept as it is for this COVID period? Secondly, there is this whole question of irregular flow of migrants, including women. How are we going to really address this in some manner to make it useful? And then this whole question of management of complaints, which you've heard about, which Sandeep Kapoorji also mentioned and Amit has also referred to. Would Mr. Sangwan react to some of these as well as any other points that he would like to make? Thank you, Mr. Sangwan.
So thank you, sir. So firstly, I may mention that I am in touch with Sandeep Kapoorji regularly, and also with Mr. Maulana, who is from IPEPCIL, who are not here with any other recruiting agents association, so that the reform in the current and the future systems are an ongoing process and will continue. So to start with, let me start with Mr. Bhardwaj first, and then I will go. So restarting the business during COVID. Restarting the business is when for example, when the flights resume, when the Ministry of Home Affairs makes it easier for people to go abroad because there are restrictions by them. And all this will depend on actually how COVID-19 takes shape. In a crystal ball, I don't want to share my personal views here because they're in looking at this crystal ball when that will happen. Secondly, he mentioned about GST. Now we have already taken up to waive off GST with the concerned department in Government of India for the fees that the immigrants pay. He talked about loans. Now loans, I believe, can be considered. We can look at it, but I don't know whether under Prime Minister Modi's Mudra scheme and all that, loans can be taken, because he gives loans to a lot of. It's a huge thing. I have heard tens of thousands of crores of loans have been given under various schemes of Prime Minister Modi's government. Then Sandeep Kapoorji mentioned about this relief continuing after March 2021. I have been interacting with him also, and at this point in time, it was only up to that. And then let's hope we will work towards it. And I don't think there should be much of a problem in terms of bank guarantees being again restored to the higher levels. But of course, you would understand that in the government systems, I am just one peg, so we can that is so Doctor, my former boss knows it very well. He's served for about 40 years, I'm sure, 35 or 40 years. Sir has served. So minimum referral wages now also we are working on it. The general idea is that in Gulf countries, for example, Sandeep ji, you told me that except Qatar, no country has a minimum referral wage. I've already discussed it with my secretary, and we want to do away with it. So, for example, except Qatar, and which you mentioned, and I took inputs from our missions, and Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, no other 4 Gulf countries don't have a minimum referral wage. So the secretary has agreed, at least, that why do we have it? So we'll work on it. Let's see whether we can have a result on that. And then insurance schemes, for example, to replace the bank guarantee. It's a good suggestion. This also we have had some internal discussions, and we can work towards it to replace either a part of the whole of in the new scheme of things, but not now. It can't be done now, but maybe in the new scheme of things it can be done. Managing complaints is a genuine thing. If it is we are open to it. How to manage complaints, we are open. As I discussed with Sandeep ji, the general feeling within the ministry is that a recruiting agent should not be blamed for the problems which are arising because of COVID-19. Now, if a worker, for example, has come back and he has lost his wages or something, and the general feeling is that it is not the recruiting agent's fault that COVID-19 happened. So why should we blame the recruiting agents for this particular issue, for example? So that is the general feeling. And regarding other complaints also, as you mentioned, you gave a specific example. It is all well taken, and we'll surely work with you in resolving those grievances as they come. Then I've already branches in the new immigration bill. There is a provision for branches and sub-agents, so that will be taken care of. Reduction the BG bank guarantees being permanent, I've already mentioned. This is, sir, you mentioned about these among the 3 questions you mentioned. So let's hope that even after 31st March 2021, we can continue to have it, although for the time being, it is only up to that. But I don't think we will try our best to make it permanent.
Wonderful.
And
Thank you so much, Ambassador Sangwan. I must inform Sandeep Kapoor ji and Bhardwaj Saab and Amit Saxena that you probably have one of the most proactive PGs you'll ever get. So make the best use of this situation as much as you can to be able to solve some of these permanent issues on an ongoing basis, which we have been discussing for many, many years now. So these were very, very important reactions that you just heard from the PG. If any of the other panelists would like to add something, they are welcome to add to any of these issues which have been presently raised. The floor is open.
Sir, if you would allow me, I have something to discuss with the representative from NSDC, Mr. Pillai.
Just a minute. Let's first finish with the PG. Let's first finish with the PG. Anything related to PG issues?
Sir, we have certain more issues, but as you said that he's the most proactive PGs that we have had. So probably we can, we'll save the time here and we will address all the other suggestions and other things directly to him. We have a long list.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. May I now turn to Nauzad. Nauzad, there were some issues, questions for you specifically. Basically asking that how can ICMPD actually help with this entire Europe situation, because there's going to be a major change in terms of high-skilled personnel and the experience in the Gulf of low-skilled or no-skilled persons going. There's a big sea change. We all know that. So how can you actually help in helping these new HRAs to bridge this gap in some manner? Thank you.
Thanks, Didar. Indeed, ICMPD is an intergovernmental organization. So we work with the 18 member states that we currently represent, but we also work with the government of India. Mr. Sangwan, in his previous capacity within the OIA, was also familiar with the work we are doing with the government in India. And I think the most important answer that we can share with you all is to try to be more comprehensive in the data that we offer and make available to you, the information that is available also via the websites. So we also work on capacity building to ensure that the future RAs are able to understand better the role and the potential that the European market offers. There's also a dearth of information that is unavailable or perhaps needs to be made available to policymakers. So we work with policymakers a great deal on making sure that there is a different perspective and outlook towards the European market. And that was one of the questions that I want to ask my fellow panelists, Mr. Yogi, is where do we see the ECNR countries in the future and the role of the Protector General's Office? And in fact, the ICMPD is able to support many of these conversations through policy framework dialogues, through work through research, through academic work, through capacity building. And last but not least, it's about trying to bring the parties together. In the first day, a lot of discussion was brought about making sure that the associations that exist in Europe can talk to the associations that exist in India. And so we would play that role as an intermediary or middleman, so to speak. So I hope I've been able to give you some ideas and suggestions on what we can do as ICMPD. I would also invite you all to check out our website, the www.icmpd.org/EU India, but also to check out the ec.europa/immigration website, which offers a great deal of information on the programs that are available from the European Union to facilitate migration from India and other parts of the world to Europe.
Thank you very much, Nauzad. In fact, Rohini, I have a suggestion for you here. Besides this ICMPD issue that he's raised, it's maybe worth it to consider doing a special webinar only on non-ECR countries, looking at this whole skills matter, and maybe you want to link it with skills, because that's the other thing. Pillai Saab, you gave us a very good presentation on the skilling work that has been happening, and this is really the future in terms, especially in the post-COVID era. How do we actually manage this entire skilling situation and be able to link it to the possibility of India again emerging as a major migrant country? So Pillai Saab, would you like to end with any specific suggestions here besides your presentation?
Didar, may I jump in before my panelist, Mr. Pillai, speaks?
Yeah, sure.
I just wanted to mention one thing. One of the trends that we are seeing in Europe is that there's also an accent towards recognizing job experience. For example, the new German Immigration Act of 2020 in March takes away from this requirement that if you are looking for a job or have been offered a job, that your qualifications need to be recognized by a German employer and industry. What they're also saying is that if you have 5 years of experience, that recognition is not necessary anymore. This is very revolutionary.
Oh, excellent. That's very, very good. That's very good.
So I think that that's also important, is that we try to look into how experience can be recognized. You see, because industry values experience and qualifications, there is definitely a need. And I think I want to recognize the work that the NSDC is doing here. India is leading on this Skill India program. But let's talk also about job experiences.
Excellent. In fact, NSDC has done a lot of work in the domestic market on recognition of pre-existing skills. And I remember in FICCI, we had a whole lot of work done in this area. And I'm sure Mr. Pillai can share some more views on it. Yes, Mr. Pillai.
I think the context is what Amit spoke about, this market becoming increasingly competitive. In the sense, when it comes to TC, we would be like Indian workers would be pitted against, say, Bangladeshi or Pakistani or Sri Lankan workers, and it's what will count is the skills piece of it, and that is the reason why we need to look at the way today how it is happening and what we propose under the news, how we propose to take it forward in terms of skilling. And I think this is very important that these two things under the Abu Dhabi dialogue itself, these two things happen. This partnerships with UAE and KSA, and these are something which will going forward. Many countries will start adopting this model. And I saw that post-COVID, that is this month, there has been extreme pressure from Takamul, Saudi Arabia, to quickly start the assessment centers. So this is a really positive thing. So they are looking to two trades, plumber and electrician, are quickly coming under this KSA Takamul model. So I see going forward, this would be something with respect to GCC countries. With respect to EU countries, in fact, we drew heavily from the CEDEFOP report, etc., CEDEFOP website and CEDEFOP database to assess what is the potential. And the first thing which comes about is social care or personal care, and of course IT professionals. And these are areas which we should quickly start looking at. And while which is from our side, the Ministry of MSDE and MEE, Ministry of External Affairs, need to start working on the G2G side of it. While the B2B, that is the business to business transaction, is something which NSDC can drive the process, and with the help of FICCI, CIA, etc., the rest of the industry association. One template model is the way we are doing with Japan. A G2G kind of association was drawn through a Ministry of Memorandum of Cooperation between the two ministries in Japan and India. And the business then took over, and today we are seeing that model slowly, gradually building up. So that's the way to go forward. And in case the qualifications do not map at this point in time, the first step is to actually start internship, apprenticeships, etc. But in due course of time, it is about mapping the qualification. And I was not sure about this, which the panelists spoke about the experience being counted. Well, if that is the case, that's another important thing we could actually look at, and maybe even certify experience through recognition of prior learning or some of that kind. So skills, I think, would be the key thing going forward in terms of sending quality manpower and also competing in this talent market when it becomes so competitive. I look forward to suggestions. We are open. In fact, the third set of countries, that is Singapore, Canada, etc. Singapore, I think, has a great model in which they actually come down to India. The assessors come down to India to test the candidates. Well, Canada, it doesn't happen. So we are trying to work with the Quebec government, asking them whether it's possible to actually assess the candidates in India before they leave India shows, rather than they going there, etc. So these kind of G2G drives are also important. So we are looking at this across these three categories. Hopefully, by the end of this, we thought before in this period, in the next one year, around 15 countries we had targeted. But maybe till September next year, that's the target for around 15 countries opening up, new countries.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pillai. You've raised some really valid issues here, and your answers are very well taken. In fact, Rohini, this is something that came up on day one also, that in the future, especially post-pandemic, please understand it's a digital future. Therefore, in terms of basic knowledge, even a carpenter will need to have basic IT skills. So this is a very important point that Pillai Saab is again making, that IT skills is something which is going to be a permanent feature, whether you're in healthcare or motor mechanic or carpenter or plumber, whatever you be, your IT skills are something which are going to be necessary to have. So maybe the entire skilling program that NSDC is running may be able to look at this. Finally, may I turn to Fräulein Mallet. Dr. Mallet, please, thank you very much for sharing your views on the Gulf. I have a question for you. While the situation doesn't look very good, especially in terms of, petroleum products and oil going on a sort of bit on a downslide at a global level, may I ask you this question? How serious are these nationalization policies in these countries? Are they really going to impact migration in a major way? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Singh, for that excellent question. I think it's very important to dissect the Gulf countries and look at the different sort of existing reforms with respect to localizations, that have been done in recent months. So in the case of Kuwait and Oman, they're actually even more serious in terms of implementing stricter localization policies. In Kuwait, for example, they even phased out expats in the government sector and limiting, imposing all these migrant quotas, or even banning, migrants who are seeking work permit renewals who are about 60 years old and those without college degrees. So they won't be able to, renew their work permits. So they're putting an age cap actually in terms of, getting their work permit renewal. So that's actually in the case of Kuwait. So they're very serious about it. Now, if you look at Oman, Oman is actually doing it both in the public sector and the private sector. And you have to look at the population structures in Oman in particular and in Saudi, because they have large proportion of migrant workers. That's why they're able to do that. And they need to really, reduce migrant dependency so they can actually offer employment to a lot of their local nationals in the private sector. UAE and Qatar are slightly a bit different. So they have roughly 90% migrant workers. And a lot of the state businesses, like utilities, services, their business model revolves around migrant workers. So they actually do want to keep migrant workers coming in. Migration generates a lot of state revenues. And for Qatar and UAE, I don't see it happening actually in these two countries, but more so in Kuwait, Oman, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia. So if you're asking me that question, the answer is UAE and UAE and Qatar, not so much, but the rest, yes. And we are seeing all these reforms already. And the fiscal budget is actually going down. And the proportion of young population in the Gulf, in the number of locals graduating every year, actually, both locally and abroad, and taking up jobs both in the public sector and the private sector, are also increasing. So expect more competition, actually, not just in the public sector, but also in the private sector across industries.
Thank you very much for those remarks. Doctor, you have again given us both the seriousness of this localization program and how we need to really plan for this in a particular manner. There is one aspect which has remained somewhat unanswered, and I would like to address this to all the panelists. What special aspect are we looking at in the future in terms of gender migration? Can we really look at a post-COVID scenario where women also going as migrants, particularly to Europe, can be seen to be in a better position than they were in the past? Is this something that the HRAs will look at?
Sir, as far as women are concerned, they are mainly going in as healthcare workers as of now. To, let's say, UK, mainly UK now, and in Germany, actually, they are, quite keen to go. But the language is the main impediment over there in Germany, actually, and certain degree qualifications and other certifications that is required for them. Otherwise, mainly if you are talking mainly about women in EU countries or any other non-ECR countries, mainly that is towards the healthcare sector basically. And things are gradually moving because this COVID pandemic, I mean, it has actually opened floodgates for the requirement of healthcare workers in each country, but and including EU. It's not different than any other country, and they are targeting more and more healthcare workers from here. Already they have started to lower down their requirements of the eligibility criteria of the healthcare workers, as they're pretty keen
Thank you
to do
very
that.
much.
So
Thank
that
you.
If I can just,
increase in
if I,
time to come. Yeah.
sorry, if I could just add, sir, besides healthcare, it's also hospitality and IT, which are hiring quite a few women. I also heard Nauzad say that 52% of Indian work permit applicants last year were women. So I think there's a good chance a lot of women are going to be going there.
I'd like to also add to that we shouldn't think about the Indian migration to Europe as a cohesive one entity. I mean, there's a great deal of differences. For example, we studied in Ireland, and a lot of the migration that is going to Ireland is female. And that's the fact that you have, as has already been mentioned by Amit, you have the big Fortune 500 companies based out of Dublin, but you've also got a huge focus on education. You've got a great deal of one of the best universities in Europe based out of Dublin. So it's not a harmonized, cohesive migration pattern that goes from India to Europe. It very much depends on the member state or the country you're talking about. Similarly, for example, when you take away the UK, the numbers and the proportions are very different, of course, now with Brexit.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I would like to make a distinction here between.
Yes, Mr. Pillai.
Yeah, I'd like to make a distinction here between healthcare and personal care. I find that healthcare is a highly regulated kind of industry in each of these countries. It's more on the personal care, geriatric care, social care. There is a lot of opportunity which I think we could look at, considering the nature of the aging populations and things like that. Even in the Japanese case, which I just spoke of, it is care workers, women care workers who are in huge demand. And as one of the panelists did say, foreign language training is becoming increasingly critical. It's one of the big skill sets we need to start promoting within the country.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that intervention, Mr. Pillai. Now, as I thank everybody to be here, may I now hand over this back to Rohini in terms of today's excellent panel that you've got together. And Rohini, you might want to conclude by asking Meera Sethi, who we all know is a leading IOM expert who that really brought this entire situation into focus so far as India is concerned. So Rohini, please, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Singh, for your really excellent moderation. I think I speak on behalf of the panel, and I think somebody has also said this in the chat box that your moderation today has really been excellent. So I'd like to thank you for that, and I'll leave Dr. Sethi.
Thank the IAS.
Yeah, I think I'll leave Dr. Sethi to do this a little formally. As you already mentioned, Dr. Sethi is a very leading expert. She's also an advisor here at IMN. So yeah, over to you, Dr. Sethi.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. And I know the time is against me right now, but I won't take long, just a few minutes. I think as an IMN advisor, I'd like to thank Ambassador Sangwan and all the panelists of day 1, 27th, when I was there listening to all of you, as well as today, day 2 of this very interesting seminar. We have brought together international experts, technical experts, ILO, ICMPD, recruitment agents, as well as the Federation of Migration and the recruitment agents. So thank you all for that. And also thank you, Mr. Amit Saxena and Dr. Singh. Yes, I have to say, Dr. Singh, that you were excellent. Otherwise, we always have a little bit of a clash with each other. But today, I think it was just perfect. And so I thank you very much to our 2 moderators who've done an excellent job. And last but not least, the young and the very highly professional and very bright team of IMN, who you do not see, but they have done an excellent work behind the scenes and have been in touch with all of us and to basically facilitate this webinars. As you know, I've been 35 years working in the area of international migration. And I don't want to take up your time, but I just want to mention three things. There is work going on at the country level, at several countries, where fast tracking of visas has already started for health professionals, for essential personnel, and for people that are considered as priority for travel purposes. There is also dialogue going on how to provide consular support services remotely so that visas can be facilitated. This is already ongoing, and you could call and knock on the doors of my former organization, and you would get even more information on which are the states involved, etc. There is also a flexibility and adaptation of some legal frameworks so that there is compliance by migrants, compliance by states, as well as compliance by the various intermediaries. So that work is already going on. And I'm pleased to say that agencies are available to provide the necessary support and also build capacity. The second point that I'd like to highlight is what came out in the meetings of day one. And there are three small issues here. I want to just take a minute. One is interstate coordination. Let us not forget internal migration. For countries like India and China, I know this dialogue is on international migration, but recruitment agents, key partners, key intermediaries in the migration process play a role both internally as well as internationally. And the numbers of internal migrants are 2.5 times more than international migrants. So let us not forget the basic human rights, the basic social rights, and all the various fundamental rights, whether it is return, whether it is access to social services, to health, as well as whether it is negotiation and bringing them justice for many of them who've lost their wages, etc. And one of the recommendations that came up on day one was establishing of a data portal. And here again, I need to say that there are agencies already who have established data portals, looking at health procedures of receiving countries, looking at the employment opportunities, looking at what's there in the labor market. It's a question of pulling them together and being able to access them and being able to use them. And I'm sure that IMN will take this up as one of the recommendations and as the next step forward, and when they do the follow-up. The third issue that came up from the meeting is on the role of digital technology. I think that's very, very clear, and I know Dr. Didar is working on it for the last year, even before COVID pandemic came in, and that has been something that he's working on. This is something we really need to look at more closely, and we need to see how we can train more and more people, especially it's going to play a key role now in the recruitment and the placement, as well as in visas and the digital technology. And my last point is, which goes back to the regional consultations. And this point never came up on the rating mechanisms, and also that is work going on at the regional level. UAE is a current host and chair of the Global Forum on Migration and Development. India has been participating. ICM has been participating in a lot of the meetings which are going on through webinars. And there is a lot of work going on, and a mapping study has been done of rating mechanisms. This can be made available through the right channel and perhaps through ICM. Harmonization of regional role of recruitment agents is also come up very strongly, and there is work in progress. And lastly, I just need to say that we are India's part of the Sustainable Development Goals, and I think we need to remember all migrants, irregular, illegal, I should not use that word, regular, all have basic human rights, whatever status anybody enjoys, the people approach the basic human rights of all migrants. We are moving very quickly now to the second phase of the crisis, to a midterm stage, and we need to really move from saving lives to bringing in livelihoods now, bringing in resilience in the populations and mapping of opportunities. So I thank you all, and it has been wonderful listening to all of you for the last 2 days. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. And Rohini, can we now all sign off? It's 6:15. Yes. I think that he also has to leave.
Yes, we're exactly on time. In fact, I'd like to thank everybody for sticking to the time. Just to add to what Dr. Sethi said, I know we had a lot of questions. We haven't been able to address all of them. Some of them were comments. Our team will be following up. We are going to be preparing notes for this entire event. We're going to be sharing it publicly as well as with all our participants and taking this forward, Ms. Sangwan as well. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Have a very good evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Singh. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Iman, for inviting us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Sangwan.
Thank you, sir, for giving the opportunity.
Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure. Rohini, congratulations. And Didar as well, congratulations on a job well done.
Super. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Rohini, very much. Thanks.
Bye, Amit.
Thank you. See you everyone.